This homily is going to be participatory. So there will be moments when you will join in, or I hope will join in, and sing with me. You can remain seated as you sing. In this sacred space, we welcome the opportunity to recognize, reflect, renew, and revise ourselves as we work for social justice and change. Many people in churches, spiritual and religious communities have used their voices to affect collective social, political, and community change through singing of hymns, protest songs, popular music, and chants. These songs move us toward positivity, action, and change. On this weekend, we celebrate the life and contributions of the Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., a respected leader of the civil rights movement. During the 1950s through the 1970s, many people worked together to fight for racial equality and legal rights, primarily for Black people in America. Many may think, though, that the civil rights movement was about how we treat people who look like me and are commonly referred to by various names that describe the hue of my skin. However, the laws and policy changes that were revised during that time extend to other racial groups, social classes, and genders. While Mahalia Jackson, the gospel superstar, inspired Dr. King with songs like If I Can Help Somebody, we also heard songs like Blowing in the Wind by Joan Baez and top Billboard song chart melodies from Woody Guthrie, Peter Yarrow, Peter Gabriel, Nina Simone, Peter, Paul, and Mary, it's a lot of Peters, Maya Angelou, Miriam Makeba, and the Beatles. Holding hands, marching across America, artists and activists of various nations and races sang one of the trademark songs that became the unofficial anthem of the civil rights movement. An adaptation of the hymn, I'll Overcome Someday, published in 1901 by the Reverend Charles Albert Tindley, an African-American minister and composer of gospel hymns in the Methodist Episcopal Church. The song was rooted in the Black gospel folk tradition and is included in church hymnals and songbooks. Pete Seeger included it in an edition of the People's Songs Bulletin in 1947, and it is still sung during protests, marches, and gatherings. Please join as we sing together. We shall overcome, we shall overcome, we shall overcome someday. Oh, deep in my heart, I do believe we shall overcome someday. Now, Pete Seeger had been harassed by the government for the political beliefs he testified to before the House Un-American Activities Committee in 1949. Through his music, he fought for civil rights, the peace movement, and the environment. Most notable of his work was to protect and preserve the Hudson River by building the sloop Clearwater, one of the first vessels in the U.S. to conduct science-based environmental education aboard a sailing ship. He believed in the power of music to connect people and bind them to a cause. He wrote songs like, If I Had a Hammer, and Turn, Turn, Turn. There's some other music, though, like, I'm sure you remember, Oh Freedom. Sing it with me. Odetta and Harry Belafonte recorded "Oh Freedom" in 1950 and sang it at the 1963 March on Washington. It sounds like a spiritual, but the text helps us recognize it was probably written around the time of the emancipation of the enslaved Americans. Like many protest songs, it's still relevant today as we continue to strive toward freedom. During the 1970s, Mercedes Sosa sang "Cambia Todo Cambia," dedicated to the Chilean people suffering under the dictator Augusto Pinochet, while Ursula Oppens performed the piano composition "El Pueblo Unido Jamás Será Vencido," translated, "The people united will never be defeated." We also listened to "When Revolution Comes" by The Last Poets, and "What's Going On" by Marvin Gaye, and then Bill Scott Heron's "The Revolution Will Not Be Televised." Then the 80s came, and Bob Marley sang "Old pirates, yes, they rob I, sold I to the merchant ships. Minutes after they took I from the bottomless pits, but my hand was made strong by the hand of the Almighty. We forward in this generation triumphantly. Emancipate yourselves from mental slavery. None but ourselves can free our minds. Have no fear for atomic energy, 'cause none of them can stop the time. How long shall they kill our prophets while we stand aside and look? Oh, some say it's just a part of it. We've got to fulfill the book." Please join as we sing the chorus. Won't you help to sing these songs of freedom? 'Cause all I ever had, redemption songs, redemption songs. Then during the fight against apartheid and the absence of images or depictions of Nelson Mandela, Johnny Clegg and Savuka sang "Asimbonanga." Paul Simon and Ladysmith Black Mamboza recorded the Christian anthem "Nkosi Sikelel' iAfrika," which was originally composed in 1897 by Enoch Sontonga, a Xhosa missionary Methodist. The text of the anthem was a revolutionary blend of Xhosa, Zulu, and Sesotho languages. It's a shame that it took 100 years for the words to sink in. God bless Africa, may her glory be lifted high. Hear our petitions, God bless us, your children. God, we ask you to protect our nation, intervene and end all conflicts. Protect us, our nation, South Africa. Ringing out from our blue heavens, from our deep seas breaking round over lasting and everlasting mountains, where the echoing crags resound, sounds the call to come together, and united we shall stand. Let us live and strive for freedom in South Africa, our land. Join us. Nkosi Sikelel' iAfrika, maluvakanisi ukhalayo, yizwa imithandazo yethu. Nkosi Sikelela, There was the epic song by Michael Jackson and other celebrities that was unforgettable. We are the world, we are the children. And the hip-hop community was standing up for freedom through Public Enemy. It's a start, a work of art, to revelize, make a change, nothing strange. People, People, we are the same. No, we're not the same because we don't know the game. What we need is awareness. We can't get careless. You say, what is this? My beloved, let's get down to business. Mental self-defensive fitness. Yo, bum rush the show. You gotta go for what you know. Make everybody see in order to fight the powers that be. Let me hear you say, fight the powers. Fight the powers that be. Let me hear you say, fight the power. Fight the powers that be. I can hear the harmonious voices of Sweet Honey in the Rocke sing, we who believe in freedom will not rest until it comes. John Legend was inspired by the news reports about gun violence and misguided criminal justice policies facing America and wrote the lyrics to Preach. Get home every morning and history's repeating, turning off my phone because it's hurting my chest. Some of you may remember the YouTube video and social media meme of Samuel Jackson singing, I Can't Breathe. The song was written by Luke Nephew in a direct action response by the group, #ThisStopsToday, linked to the police not being indicted in the 2014 Eric Garner case. Members of the group blocked the entrance of the Manhattan Bridge in New York with coffins while protesters sang. I can hear my neighbor crying, I can't breathe. Now I'm in the struggle and I can't leave. Calling out the violence of the racist police. We ain't gonna stop till people are free. We ain't gonna stop till people are free. The jolt of the sound of male choral singers pounding their chests as the cacophony of their voices asynchronously declare, you shot me, you shot me, you shot me, is a shocking experience while the mental impact deeply reverberates within during the 7-movement choral and orchestral composition, 7 Last Words of the Unarmed, written in 2015 by Joelle A. Thompson, the current Houston Grand Opera resident artist. In November, our church choir sang Hope by Buff Whaley from the UK. Whaley is the founder of the Commoners Choir and has combined his passions for community music and political activism since the 1980s. The world continues to fight social justice issues as marginalized communities continue to be oppressed and underserved, as our social systems, infrastructures, and institutions are managed with archaic, racist, and misogynistic policies and procedures. Mass attacks and murders are still being committed. The lack of access to adequate and appropriate health care is rampant. Our environment is being abused. Basic constitutional rights are being challenged to become more equitable, inclusive, and diverse, while educational resources are inadequate. We still face issues of prejudice, privilege, and poor political representation on a daily basis. War, crime, and capitalism are championed instead of nonviolence, peace, compassion, and justice. I encourage each of you to stand up for justice in peaceful ways. Use your voice in positive ways to drown out negativity. Use your speaking and singing to reject microaggressions and macroaggressions. Be an advocate and an ally for those who are unable or unwilling to stand up for themselves. The language of music speaks messages that are often heard and accepted more readily than harshly spoken demands, complaints, or even suggestions. A catchy tune can keep a song and its lyrics in your thoughts just looping for days. In the spring of 2016, I wrote this song for the United Church of Christ's National Youth Event. I'm sharing it with you today to inspire you. No matter what age or stage of life you are in, there is always an opportunity to affect change if you use your voice to exercise your faith, have hope, and just believe. Believe you can change the world. Believe it starts inside of you. Believe with God you can't go wrong. Believe there's so much work to do. You were born with a purpose. Just trust and be assured. Your destiny is promised. Summon the confidence to soar. Believe you can change the world. Believe it starts inside of you. Believe with God you can't go wrong. Believe there's so much work to do. You may not see it right away. Your faith must be secure. Your hope and work will lead the way if you believe and you endure. Believe you can change the world. Believe it starts inside of you. Believe with God you can't go wrong. Believe there's so much work to do. With God have faith and hope and just believe. Amen. Thank you. Thank you.
In 1963, Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. told us, "Injustice anywhere is a threat to justice everywhere." We are caught in an inescapable network of mutuality, tied in a single garment of destiny. Whatever affects one directly affects all indirectly. Dr. King was born 94 years ago today and was one of the most prominent leaders in the civil rights movement. Inspired by his Christian beliefs and the nonviolent activism of Mahatma Gandhi, he led targeted, nonviolent resistance in order to abolish legalized, institutional racial segregation, discrimination, and disenfranchisement throughout the United States. This movement would come to achieve pivotal legislative gains in the Civil Rights Act of 1964, Voting Rights Act of 1965, and the Fair Housing Act of 1968. In his final years, he expanded his focus to include opposition towards poverty, capitalism, and the Vietnam War. He oversaw the 1955 Montgomery bus boycott. Later, as president of the Southern Christian Leadership Conference, he helped organize some of the nonviolent 1963 protests in Birmingham, Alabama. King was one of the leaders of the 1963 March on Washington, where he delivered his revolutionary "I Have a Dream" speech. In 1964, King won the Nobel Peace Prize for combating racial inequality through nonviolent resistance. The next year, he helped organize 2 of the 3 Selma to Montgomery marches. The following year, in 1966, Dr. King delivered the Ware Lecture at the Unitarian Universalist Association General Assembly in Hollywood, Florida. The title of the lecture was "Don't Sleep Through the Revolution." In 1968, King was planning a national occupation of Washington, D.C. to be called the Poor People's Campaign when he was assassinated on April 4th in Memphis. Dr. William Barber has taken up the mantle of the Poor People's Campaign, and as Mary indicated a moment ago, this is something that you can become involved in. King was posthumously awarded the Presidential Medal of Freedom in 1977 and the Congressional Gold Medal in 2003. Martin Luther King Jr. Day was enacted at the federal level by legislation signed by President Ronald Reagan in 1986. Now, this legacy of Dr. King led me to begin wondering how creating change in the world relates to some other things. Well, we just learned that the link between music and social action. Dr. King was a Baptist minister. I wondered, what is the correlation between faith communities and social action? Between spirituality and activism? The rhythm of music is the pulse of social action, and in many cultures, the church is the heart of that action. But what exactly is social action? It's the practice of people coming together as part of an organized group to solve problems and create positive change in their community. Then, when social activism is integrated with spirituality, we create what we call spiritual responsibility. Now, not everyone understands that our activism can spring from a place of spirituality. I hear of police tending to a protest, expressing surprise that people of faith would engage in what Congressman John Lewis called good trouble. I suspect these police are more familiar with the paintings of a very passive-looking Jesus with a lamb draped around his shoulders, telling stories to little white children, than the Jesus angrily overthrowing the tables of the money changers in the temple. Not to mention, Jesus was sentenced to capital punishment by the authorities for riling up the citizenry. What would Jesus do indeed? Some of you may remember what conservative commentator Glenn Beck told his listeners some dozen years ago. I beg you, look for the words social justice or economic justice on your church website. If you find it, run as fast as you can. Social justice and economic justice, they're code words. Now, am I advising people to leave their church? Yes. Now, I'm more inclined to listen to the words of Bishop Desmond Tutu, who told us, there comes a point where we need to stop just pulling people out of the river. We need to go upstream and find out why they're falling in. Too many conservative commentators and even religious leaders would like us to continue to feel really good about pulling people out of the river without ever stopping to wonder why they're falling in. Elder Lightfoot Solomon Mishaw had a popular radio show called The Radio Church of God in 1929, and later became the first minister with a weekly television show. Despite being African American, he worked with J. Edgar Hoover's FBI to publicly discredit Dr. King. Through such efforts, even as Martin Luther King championed civil rights and spoke out against the Vietnam War and economic disparity, only a quarter of Americans and only 13% of even black churches supported Dr. King. Many churches feared or were otherwise intimidated from showing support for the movement. Elder Mishaw spread a gospel of individual salvation, preaching that it was converting people to Christianity that would help cure the evils and injustices of the world, ignoring the institutional problems that create injustice. But as Dr. King pointed out, any religion that professes to be concerned about the souls of men and is not concerned about the slums that damn them, the economic conditions that strangle them, and the social conditions that cripple them, is a spiritually moribund religion awaiting burial. Now, I don't want to imply that those at creedal churches focused on salvation are not concerned with others outside their ability to convert them. Many are loving, charitable, and volunteer to help others, just as we used to. We have any number of community service projects that you can help with. But here, in my mind, is the big difference. We also have the Justice Coordinating Council. We are pulling people out of the river and running upstream to see what the problem is, to see if we can do something about fixing it. Western Christian theology conceives of liberation primarily in personal terms, wrote confident to Dr. King and civil rights leader Andrew Young. He said, I needed to see the relationship among ethics, theology, and socioeconomic liberation. In mainstream America, social action is often done by secular institutions. Perhaps we can trace this back to European immigrants fleeing religious persecution coming to these shores. They created a weird dichotomy trying to separate church and state. LaDonna Harris, one of the most influential Native Americans in politics, observes, in American society, churches are one place, work is somewhere else, and education is over there, and none of them relate to one another. For Indian people, spirituality is the integrating force of their lives and the essence of leadership. In many communities of color, faith permeates everyday life. In Latinx cultures, you may notice it in home altars, wearing holy medals, or statues of saints. Author and educator Dr. Leah Williams recalls, the church was the platform from which Black leadership sprang. It was a natural progression from spiritual responsibility to social and political involvement. In other words, spiritual responsibility reflects the integration of leadership, spirituality, and social activism. Now, those of you who take careful notes during my sermons will recall that last week I reported that Reverend Bob Shively, the senior minister of this church for some 20 years, had his life changed in his senior year in college. When Dr. King asked all who could do so to join him in a march for voting rights from Selma to Montgomery, Bob went. It changed his life to see religious institutions witnessing for peace and justice. But Bob was hardly the only Unitarian Universalist who joined Dr. King. In his book, Call to Selma, Reverend Richard Leonard reports that more than 200 Unitarian Universalists, including about 1/5 of the UU ministers at the time, answered Dr. King's call. Reverend Leonard described Selma as a pivotal point in the advancement of civil rights and a defining moment for Unitarian Universalism. According to UU scholar Mark Morrison Reed, in answering Martin Luther King Jr.'s call to action, UU shifted from passing earnest resolutions about racial justice to putting their lives on the line for the cause. And sadly, some did lose their lives for the cause. Both UU minister James Reeb and UU activist Viola Liuzzo were murdered in Selma working for voting rights. This was the moment when UUs realized that our liberation is bound together and acted on the idea that we are all a part of that interdependent web of existence. That whatever affects one directly affects all indirectly. It reminds me of the quote by the indigenous Australian Lila Watson when she said, "If you have come here to help me, you're wasting your time. But if you have come because your liberation is bound up with mine, then let us work together." It strikes me that the legacy for people of faith, for Unitarian Universalists, is clear. We need to tend both ends of the river. helping the people drowning right now, and dismantling the systems of oppression that are catapulting them into the water. Because we're all in this together. As Dr. King said, injustice anywhere is a threat to justice everywhere. We are caught in an inescapable network of mutuality, tied in a single garment of destiny. Whatever affects one directly affects all indirectly. May we take these words to heart, to become spiritually responsible, to work for justice for all and justice everywhere. Amen.